Two dicks, wow.
Yeah! Here we go! Here we go! Here we go!
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the 1IQ Football Talk podcast.
And having to go, yeah, but he did kind of do this.
What I'm hearing is you just want Tom Brady dead. Like, that's all I'm hearing at this point. You just want Brady
Well,
dead.
not anymore. He's retired now, so I'm good with that. I don't want him calling games anymore because, holy hell, he's hard to listen to.
Enough angry and, depressing from myself. Sterling, thank you for being able to sit there as my therapist for this episode.
Start the game already!
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the 1IQ Football Talk podcast. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about this week. There is a list. Normally we can count and we don't even need to actually write the list of stuff we're going to talk about going into the week because it's usually maybe 3, 4, at most 5 or 6. We don't have that this week. But first off, Sterling, buddy, how you doing?
Doing all right. It was a long week, so I'm glad there's some football news to talk about. Gives me something else to do.
Yeah, and boy, oh boy, does this list kick off, and we'll go through all of the things that we're going to talk about here today in the early stages of this. First off, the Chicago Bears made 2 trades, and so as a Chicago Bears fan, that was exciting. What do the Browns do with Deshaun Watson? Where does Myles Garrett go? And why are the Browns constantly messing that situation up? Trey Hendrickson wants to be traded from the Bengals. The Bengals are playing on very thin ice here. Joey Bosa got cut. The Jags cut 4 players and traded 1. Brock Purdy and his contract situation, we actually learned about some numbers that the 49ers gave to Brock Purdy's camp. The Steelers cut Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf is looking for a trade. Max Crosby has a record-setting deal. Sam Darnold and what his plan is going to be. For your Pittsburgh Steelers, is it going to be Fields or Darnold? And kind of what's going to happen with that for the Steelers. Jonathan Allen was released by the Commanders. Harold Landry was released by the Titans. And then late last night, casually, the Seattle Seahawks traded Geno Smith to the Raiders for a 3rd-round pick and what that means for both of those 2 teams. And then finally, we woke up this morning to see 1st-round pick for the Kansas City Chiefs of last year, Xavier Worthy, decided to get arrested for assault. So,
busy week for the offseason, and we're not even at the beginning of free agency officially yet either. So, like, the tampering window opens up on Monday, and then the free agent signings will start coming in Wednesday.
Yeah, we're gonna know all about the free agent signings on Monday. It's gonna be a massive, massive day. I'm probably gonna be live streaming for most of that, just kind of giving live reactions to all of the news. But yeah, let's start things off here with the first 2 trades that the Chicago Bears make, because that was kind of going into this week. We knew stuff was going to happen, but we weren't necessarily knowing what was going to happen, and we didn't know if there was going to be trades, if there was going to be releases. We knew all of those things were going to come to fruition, but the Chicago Bears kind of opened things off. With the first move going, they traded for Rams left guard Jonah Jackson. And initially looking at this one, you gave up a 6th-round pick, which was, funny enough, the pick that the Bears received from the Steelers in the Justin Fields trade. Getting Jonah Jackson, Bears needed offensive line help. Jonah Jackson is a Pro Bowl level guard. Didn't have that great of a year with the Rams last year, but then again, he was hurt. And then when he was healthy, the backup was playing so well at that point that they just said, we're not going to keep you. And he got traded to the Bears. Biggest reason why he probably went to the Bears is, he has spent 4 years with Ben Johnson. He knows how to play with Ben Johnson, and he knows what is expected of a Ben Johnson-led offense.
Yeah, and this was one of those big key holes on that offensive line for the Bears to fill in. So that is a great acquisition for sure. And that limits how much they've got to go out and spend in free agency, how many draft picks they got to spend on it, and ultimately brings us to the other trade that the Bears made, which was
It was going after Joe Tooney of the Kansas City Chiefs for a 4th-round pick in next year's class, also a guard. Now, when the Bears made the Jonah Jackson trade, I sat back and went, this is a really, really solid move. I give this like a C plus B minus type move because again, when you're getting a guy like Jonah Jackson who just signed as a 3-year signing for the Rams last year and they're already moving on from him, sometimes that gives off a lot of red flags. But ultimately I go, there was injuries. No one knows really what happened with Jonah Jackson last year. And you're sitting back going like, okay, this is a really good first step for the Bears. It's who are they going to sign in free agency to pair with him? Is it going to be a Drew Dahlman, the center from Atlanta, who is going to be the other guard that they ultimately try to bring in? And then, of course, we talk about very next morning, 24 hours later, it's, okay, well, the Bears just traded for one of the best guards in all of football. And Joe Tooney, last year for the Chiefs, not only played left guard, but he also played left tackle for them because they literally had no other options. Joe Tooney was named the MVP of the Chiefs last year. That was a player voted thing, and they all voted for him. And, he's 31 years old, I'm pretty sure, so it's not like he's a young man. He only has 1 year left on his deal. But no sacks given up last year. He had 1 penalty against him. Those 2 moves for the Chicago Bears have completely changed the outlook of what free agency is going to look like, what the draft is potentially going to look like. Because again, when looking at the Chicago Bears team, I often said they have a bunch of needs, but their biggest needs are left tackle, left guard, center, and right guard. Well, guess what? You have left guard and right guard now figured out with a guy that Ryan Poles knows in Joe Tooney, who again has been an unbelievable guard wherever he's been, whether it was with New England or whether it was with Kansas City, and then Jonah Jackson, who is a pretty good risk to reward type player to bring in. And if you sign, for instance, Drew Dahlman, who is the highest linked center to the Bears this year, well, guess what? You can really start to play around with that 10th overall pick in the draft, where you can go, we don't have to go down this path of forcing our hand down an offensive line route. We can draft an offensive lineman, and that would still be great. We can draft a running back in Ashton Genty if he's still there. We can draft, for instance, Mason Graham or Mike Green or James Pierce Jr. Or simply, we can just trade back, get a handful more picks in this class, and still get an impactful player. Like, both of these 2 moves have really set the Bears up nicely to go into free agency. Now, for them, they still need to get that center. And if they don't sign a center in free agency, well, then you have to look towards the draft. But even then, these 2 moves allow the Bears to be a little bit more selective and picky. Because, say, if they don't get a Drew Dahlman, they can go out there and get a... he's the center for Indianapolis, who I know is going to be available. The name's skipping my mind at the moment, but you can be more selective with that. And for instance, that trade back scenario, you trade back, let's say, with the Buccaneers and trade back to pick 18. Gray Zabel is going to be available, and he's widely expected to be the top center in this draft class. You can get that guy. You can have a plugged-in center. I would rather a little bit more of an experienced center for this year with Caleb, but both of these moves are highly, highly exciting.
They are, and they're exactly what the Bears needed to do. So I mean, now you've got Thuney, you've got Jackson, and you've got Darnell Wright still on that right tackle. Like you are set there, and so it really is just that center and left tackle that are big question marks now. And you can choose to just grab one of those in free agency and then draft the other one. With that 10th pick, honestly, even with that 10th pick, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing the Bears reach to take the best quality center and just be like, we could trade back 5 spots, but what if one of those teams scoops them? Then we're hooped. Like just grab him. And I know you'd prefer a little bit more experience at that position, but we also got to remember that this is only year 2 for Caleb. This is year 1 for Ben Johnson. And so there's going to be that space for growing pains this year. And it affords them that ability for a raw center to grow along with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and form that great bond that you could get from a young quarterback center duo. And so it does. It opens up the opportunities for the Bears. I still think, unless they sign a left tackle and a center in free agency, then they need to spend that first round pick on that offensive line still, unless Ashton Genty is there. That is one of the few players where you could go, I mean, behind Wright and Thuney running the ball, having Genty, like you can't pass that up if that falls into your lap. It's one of those situations where the Bears would just have to jump on it for sure.
Yeah, these two moves, and I heard it described best, is it creates excitement for Bears fans on draft night. On day 1 of the draft, you have excitement going. We don't necessarily know what the option is going to be. And now, I say the Bears need left tackle. Braxton Jones is still a serviceable left tackle. And so if for instance, they want to go through this entire period and say, we're giving Braxton Jones this one last year to see with an improved coaching staff that are going to be able to use him a little bit better, if he can be the long-term solution. Now, I know when you are one of the main guys on an offensive line that had almost a record-setting amount of sacks for your rookie quarterback, that's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, but the Bears, their biggest issue was the interior of that offensive line, and they have nailed 2 of those bring-ins here at the moment.
Oh, it was 100%. I mean, you look at a lot of the dropbacks and the rolls from pressure that we saw from Caleb. He was often rolling to that left side because that was where the most protection was. And so there definitely needs to be some props given to Braxton Jones. I would not have an issue with the Bears giving him that one more year going, hey, you've got some support beside you now. I don't know how many of those sacks were necessarily Jones's fault, but as you said, the majority were that 3-set interior of the guards in the center. There was just so much rush up the middle and made it difficult for Caleb Williams. It made it difficult for the run game. And so closing up those holes is great. And yeah, it's that center position needs to be addressed. They need to find the guy for the future, because Thuney is possibly a rental. And at 31, even if he does resign, he'll probably have to get paid, and it'll probably only be on a 2 or 3 year deal before he's done. And so that is still a position that will have to be addressed next year, possibly. But for now, I mean, protecting Caleb Williams was the number 1 goal for this Bears organization. And Ryan Poles, so far, just through trades before we even hit free agency, has done that. And they still have a crazy amount of cap space available to go out and spend in free agency, whether it be for extra pieces on defense, for that center position, for a couple of middle tier pieces to be backups on that offensive line in case somebody struggles or goes down to an injury. It affords a lot more wiggle room for Ryan Poles and makes this a lot easier for him to negotiate with players because he can go, hey, look what we've already done. Like, come with us. We're building for a Super Bowl in the next 3 years, and we want you here.
Yeah, it allows the Bears to have so much flexibility. And again, still $50 million in cap space to go out there and spend. Now they're kind of in that middle of the road ballpark of offensive or for cap space. But yeah, you get 2 offensive linemen that without a doubt are players that can go out there. One guy is an all-pro in Thuney. The other guy, Jonah Jackson, has made it to a Pro Bowl on the offensive line for the Lions when he played for them. So it's a situation of where the Bears have put themselves in a situation of where you can look at it and go, we can now be a little bit more selective with some of these guys, where we're not going to have to throw money at a certain position just because we need to fix this position. But now moving forward to some of the other news that we're talking about, and this is going to detail in terms of with the Cleveland Browns and the situation of what they're going to do with two of their biggest talked about players this offseason. One being Deshaun Watson and one being Myles Garrett. Now, I would like to start with the Deshaun Watson situation because we've already talked about how bad of a person he is, and how bad of a football player that he's been, and how bad that contract is, and we have talked about that at length over these last couple years. We know he's not going to play this year because of the setback with the surgery, and he's going to have another one. So this leaves the Browns in an interesting situation because you could look at that and go, well, we have the second overall pick, so that guarantees us a quarterback in this class. But you could also look at it in a situation if you're the Browns going, well, if we have a situation of where Shedeur Sanders is on the board, do we want him to come in and be the quarterback of the future? And the answer is maybe not this year, because you're going to have to trade away Myles Garrett, and we're going to talk about that here in a few moments. I sit back and I go, it would probably be smarter for the Browns to either try to trade back with another team to acquire more draft capital for the future, or just sit there and take the best player available. Because let's say Tennessee, they trade with the Giants and they draft a quarterback. And let's say the Raiders, they get really antsy for a quarterback and they know some other teams are potentially trying to sneak up there and get that. They trade up to that, or they want to trade up to that pick number 2. You can sit back if you're the Browns going, well, we can move back. But let's say, for instance, you really don't want Shedeur Sanders and you just go, man, let's just take Abdul Carter and worry about our quarterback problem next year, because A, we still have Deshaun Watson for 2 more years. So we could look at it in next year when we're talking about the draft time going, well, we're going to have to pay Deshaun Watson $45 million for a season. But guess what? He can play that full season as that bridge quarterback, while also let's just say they get lucky and they get Archie Manning. They say, you know what, Archie, you're probably better than Deshaun Watson right now, but we're just going to have you sit for a year. You have had fairly limited experience at college with not a lot of play time, so we're just going to let you sit for a year. This guy's going to kind of just do dumb things and do bad things, and then at the end of the year, we're just going to say, here you go, please go away. That could be an option for the Browns, where you can kind of actually use this negative towards a little bit of a positive.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how I feel about the Browns. I would love to see them continue to tread water, slowly drowning, because it's a garbage organization. But to play the other side of it here, like, if I'm the Browns and you want to truly set yourself up for success here, you have to trade Myles Garrett. It sounds like Nick Chubb is going elsewhere. You have very limited options at wide receiver. Your defense is starting to fall apart and get older. At this point, I would be finding out who wants Shedeur Sanders the most and trading that second pick away. You drop down in this year's draft, you grab a first for next year as well from that team, and then you trade Myles Garrett away and do the same thing, try to grab at least another first from somewhere. And honestly, at this point, he's out for this year. He's got 1 year left, but we saw what Deshaun Watson was doing when he was healthy for this team, and all it did was cause more problems. And you're still going to be drafting young players and bringing them into the locker room. You don't want them coming into that dysfunction. If I'm the Browns, I go, here's your money, Deshaun. Get out of our lives. Just cut him. Eat that cap space anyway, because you're going to no matter what, but it's going to hinder your team. And just play with the best you can possibly put on the field for the next couple of years and wait for that quarterback to fall into your lap. If you've got 2 first-round picks next year, maybe 3, 2 first-round picks the following year, and you start that true from the ground up rebuild. Every pick you've got, you go best player available any position that we need, and you just start building from there. Are you going to win 9 games? No. Are you going to win 5? Probably not. Are you going to go winless? Also probably not. It's hard to go winless in this league now. And so honestly, they'd be better off trying to bring Jameis Winston back because he was a positive influence in that locker room. Cut Deshaun Watson out completely. Just get rid of him. Pay him out. Eat that. It was a mistake he's made. Why keep letting him come in and cause problems for your team? I wouldn't even want him playing for me next year at whatever price it was. It's just, that's in my opinion, the best route for the Browns to go is just remove Deshaun Watson completely and try to get as many first round picks as you can from your number 2 overall pick and Myles Garrett.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with you with that one. I like the idea of having Watson as that bridge quarterback, of just being like, you know what, like, even if you don't have the first overall pick, like, let's say you get Iamali Lava from Tennessee when he's like the second overall pick, you can use that and go, we're just gonna have that bridge situation. We're already having to pay this guy anyways, so let's throw him out there, and if he gets hurt, whatever, we're didn't care about that anyways. Well, I get what you're saying with just that cancer kind of personality, and yeah, that's something that you can do.
Right. Well, and it was the attitude on the field too, because there were a couple times last year where it was, they're calling a play, and Deshaun Watson's like, "No, I'm not running that," and he's walking off the field. So the Browns have to burn a timeout and then run their punt team out there because he refuses to go for it on 4th down. He refuses to do a quarterback sneak.
It just hurts the
When
team.
you've got that kind of an ego, you'd be better off spending your second rounder this year and go out and get like Jackson Dart if that's what you want to do, and just be like, we're going to go full experiment with a rookie. We're going to throw him out there, see what he can do. You still have Dorian Thompson-Robinson on your roster as well. He was the guy that you were bringing in to eventually succeed Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
And so just let him go and start your true rebuild now. Stop clinging on to what was likely the worst trade in NFL history. You've made it. Have lived with it. You have an opportunity now to move on from it. Now that it's only 2 years of that dead cap space, it's a lot easier to eat that than when it was 3 years and 4 years. When all of this stuff started coming out, it's much easier to just wash your hands of it now. Go, here's your $120 million that we still owe you. Get out of our lives.
Yeah, and you and I are not disagreeing on this one. It's just kind of one of those things of where it's like Deshaun Watson needs to go, but you just probably not going to look at this particular season as someone where you are going to try to replace that quarterback. Is kind of what I'm looking at, but yeah.
No, that's what I mean. Don't use your second overall pick. Don't do Shadur Sanders. You don't have enough other pieces in place. Your O-line's not great. Your D-line's not great. Your secondary's falling apart. You don't have receivers. You're losing your running back. Like, that's what I mean. Every position is a need. It's sort of like the Bears. They could have taken Bryce Young.
Yep.
But they looked at it and went, well, we're still missing a few pieces. Let's trade back, have one more really good draft, and see what we get next year. And boom.
You get Caleb Williams.
Caleb Williams fell into their lap. So the Browns could do the same thing. And as you said, Archie Manning falls in their lap. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, your first overall pick, we got the first pick. You're not going to sit behind Deshaun Watson. We're getting rid of him so he can't teach you any of his bad habits.
You are not going to go to a massage parlor with Deshaun Watson.
You are not going for any massages with him. Just, that's what the Browns should do if they want to finally become actually relevant in this league outside of the greater Cleveland area.
Yeah, but the other big thing here at the moment is they are in some pretty bad, dire straits with what they're doing with Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett went out and publicly announced that he wanted to trade, and he simply said, this is not about money. This is not about me disliking Cleveland. This is just about me wanting to try to compete for a Super Bowl. This is me just trying to dedicate my legacy and just sealing it off, that sort of thing. And he did it very respectfully. He wasn't saying anything bad about the organization, and he hasn't. He's just been a consummate pro about this whole situation, and the Browns I mean, like, what are you expecting the Browns to necessarily do at that opening situation of where they hear that they go, of course, well, we're not going to trade Myles Garrett. And but like every team says that, oh, we're not going to trade this player, and then eventually it kind of ultimately happens. And there are situations like this and that. And right now they have just been like, oh, we're not doing it, we're not doing it. It's like, guys, like he's not being a nuisance for you. He's just saying like, please, I just want to go to a contender. He even went as far as to try to talk to the owner of the team this week, and the owner said, I am not talking to you. You are going to talk to the general manager. And he's going, well, the general manager doesn't want me to be traded, so I'm kind of in a stuck. That's why I came to you. And the Browns are just playing with fire. Like, you have an asset that is so unbelievably rich that you can get rid of. You're going to get a first round pick. You're probably going to get more picks on top of that. I don't know if you're going to get 2 first rounders, but you were definitely getting 1. And let's say you push that first round pick to next year. Like, let's say you're the Browns, you go, you know what? We really want to give us a ton of ammo for next year's class when that is arguably looking like it is a better class, not just for general talent, but for the quarterbacks, which is something that we are going to need. Again, we just finished talking about that. And if you're the Browns, let's say a team does want to give you 2 first round picks. Well, great. You get this one this year and next year. You can give yourself so much ammunition to build yourself moving forward. And you're sitting back going, no, we want him to stay here. It's like, we get that. I'm sure that every Browns fan ever is sitting back going, we don't want to lose Myles Garrett. But you don't really have a choice. He's not going to play for you.
Right? It's the reality of the business, and they need to accept it. I wonder how much of it is we don't want to trade you, and how much of it is they talked to a couple of those contender teams and the offers were so horribly low that it made them rethink what their options are. And really, like, if the offers coming back are too low, that's the point when Cleveland needs to look at it and go, well, maybe we have to retain a certain percentage of Myles Garrett's salary so that a team like the Philadelphia Eagles or the Detroit Lions can afford Myles Garrett. Because that's the issue that a lot of the contender teams are looking at, is they're like, we'd love to have him here, but if we trade for Myles Garrett, that is literally all we can do this offseason. And it has looked a little bit like Howie Roseman is making moves to sort of build that cap space availability to get a Myles Garrett. But at the same time, he's been so successful with his first round picks lately that he's going to be very hard pressed to part with those. And so that's a situation where I think Cleveland's going to have to sweeten the pot by going, we'll retain 50% of his salary, and because we know we're not going to be a contender and we can't spend on anybody right now anyway. And so we'll pay for the guy to play for your team, basically, as long as we're getting at least a first back and maybe a third and a fourth.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate situation for Myles Garrett, because I know he's a Browns player, but I'm sure you still have a ton of respect for Myles Garrett and what he's accomplished. Both of us didn't think he deserved to win that Defensive Player of the Year award not last season, but the year before. But it's one of those things where, like, even winning it, it's still like, I mean, like, yeah, he's still one of the best defensive players in the entire NFL. It's not like it's completely out of left park where they're like, oh, this no name who ended up getting 5 sacks got the defensive player. Like, no, it was worthy of it. We just didn't think he was the guy that was ultimately the right choice. And, like, you just feel bad for this guy who's just been such a pro for this team, re-signed with the team, tried to build everything, and the Browns are just doing him dirty this bad. And again, it's like when we talked about in our pre-show meeting, where we were joking about billionaires not building their own stadiums because they would actually benefit more from doing it. Yeah, you're going to have to spend a shit ton of money up front, but you're ultimately going to be making out like a bandit down the line when you get to set your own prices and do this, and that, and you get all the revenue from it. And we're looking at the Browns going like they're asking for public funding when they can just get a big load of money for this massive asset that they have.
Right, and it's tough. Like I do feel for Miles Garrett because he's been struggling with some injuries too, having to be such a workhorse for this Cleveland team. So it wouldn't surprise me for him to look at it and go, I'd rather take the fines and sit out this season, get healthy, and then sign a big contract somewhere else next year. And then Cleveland gets nothing for him.
Well, he still has 2 years on his contract. Yeah.
Still, like
Yeah.
it's unfortunately it's just tough, as I said, for some of the top contenders to be able to afford a guy like Miles Garrett. It might be a situation where Miles Garrett needs to step back and go, okay, I'm willing to go to a middle of the road contender, somebody who's maybe just verging on it, if that means you guys get that greater return, and then maybe me being there is just enough to push them to be a contender. And I look at teams like the Texans and the Jags, for something like that.
Yeah, this whole situation with the Browns, they're just one of those teams here at the moment where we're just looking at this going like, how are you guys fumbling both of these situations so poorly? Like, again, you're kind of in lockstep with Deshaun Watson here at the moment. Like,
Yep.
it like, even if you cut him, like, you're hurting yourself. But you look at the Broncos, what they did after 2 years of Russell Wilson. They said, yeah, we understand we're going to have $83 million of dead cap space on our books for the next couple of years, but it's better to have that dead cap space than to have this guy on our team. And it's the same thing with Deshaun Watson, and they're just messing up with a guy that you can get so much for, and they're just doing really, really dumb things here.
They're being the Browns organization.
They are being
and that's why they always struggle too, because you treat a player like this, and what's going to happen is down the road, other players are going to reconsider signing there as free agents. Players that you draft there are going to look at what happens here and go, do I really want to sign a second contract with this team, or do I want to force them to franchise tag me until I can get out?
Well, we've already seen it with Denzel Ward here. He said if they trade Myles Garrett, I'm going to have to reconsider if I want to continue playing for this organization. So we're already seeing it. But speaking of another AFC North team doing some really dumb shit, that is the Cincinnati Bengals. And again, we talked about this team saying, okay, well, we know you're going to have to pay T. Higgins. You're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. You're likely going to have to find an extension for Trey Hendrickson. Both of us agreed that Trey Hendrickson should have been the Defensive Player of the Year this year. He really deserved that. And we found out earlier this week that Trey Hendrickson was given permission from the Bengals to go seek a trade. When I first heard that, I had to make sure that I wasn't being spoofed by an NFL parody account, because I was looking at it going, why? Why would you ever allow that to happen? Your defense was one of the very worst in the NFL last year. The only good piece that you had was Trey Hendrickson. It's not like he's 35 years old at this point. He's 28, so he's still relatively young. Might be a little bit older. I can't remember, but he's not necessarily an ancient player, but you're just looking at that going like, man, you are actively looking to potentially try to get rid of your best defensive player, the only defensive player that was worth a shake of piss last year. And then not only that, you're franchise tagging T. Higgins. Like, what's going to happen with Jamar Chase? Like, we heard Joe Burrow talk this offseason at the Super Bowl saying, if the Eagles can keep everyone, then so should we. If they can get this guy, and this guy all on contracts and still have money left over, we can sign Chase, we can sign Higgins, we can sign Trey. We all know the Bengals historically have been a very cheap organization. And if they keep playing these games, for instance, if Jamar Chase says, I'm done with this organization, they aren't dealing in good faith, I'm out, and T. Higgins, you're not going to franchise tag him a third time. and then he's allowed to go, guess what, Bengals? Joe Burrow.
Yep. Exactly. I've been saying it for ages. The Bengals organization does not know how to build a football team. They stumbled in and lucked out getting a guy like Joe Burrow. And then we're like, okay, we'll partner him with Jamar Chase. Great duo.
Yep.
But the problem is all this team is doing is getting wide receivers for their quarterback and not building anything else. Trey Hendrickson being the best piece they had. Yeah, their defense improved throughout the season last year. But it got worse before even this move went on because they placed Sam Hubbard on the reserve retired list. They released Sheldon Rankins, which were two of their biggest D linemen. And so those two plus Hendrickson, have to completely rebuild your defensive line. Plus your secondary is weak. Plus your O-line's okay, but it's not great. You've got basically the Bengals are kind of like the opposite of the Steelers right now, where they've got all this firepower on offense, but they can't stop the other team to save their lives. And the Bengals team, they just cannot seem to figure out how to build a balanced roster. They get a star and they just build that spot and that's it. And if they can't find a way to do this, or they don't find a way to get extremely lucky in the draft and just hit all-star after all-star stud with each of their defensive picks, they're going to end up missing out on the playoffs again next year. They're going to have a subpar year, and it's just going to be that same cycle for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, and I looked at this Bengals team and I said, you know what? You have Trey Hendrickson on that defense. You draft, let's say, 2 guys on the defense with your first 2 picks.
Yep.
This is a starters draft where you're going to get a bunch of guys in the first 4 rounds that are all going to be starters for your team. And right there, if you're the Bengals, you can get those 2 starters, put yourself in a really good position, a couple of free agent moves of just casual guys. Because again, we talk about the Bengals like this. They don't need to be a top 5 defense to be successful. They could be a top 15 defense, and guess what? They're probably going to win 14 games if they have that. Just look at what they did last year with that offense, where it's going like, we need to put up literally 40 points to guarantee us a win, and sometimes even that's not enough. If you get a defense out there that can stop 28 points or only give up 28 points a game, well, guess what? The Bengals are going to win a vast majority of those games because they almost did that this year. And if you improve that defense, that team is only going to get better. And now you're saying to your best defender, yeah, you can go look for a trade if you want. Like, it's fine. We're cool with that. Like, there was one trade proposal that I saw someone make, and it wasn't even like a Bears fan. It was someone said, like, what if Trey Hendrickson gets traded to the Bears and the Bears send pick number 10 for Trey Hendrickson and pick 17 while also sending one of their second round picks again this year. So it's a first round swap and it's a second round pick that the Bears currently have, whether it's the Panthers or ours, and we also get Trey Hendrickson. I'm like, yeah, deal. Like, now, please. Yes.
Right.
Like, I will more than happily take that. We get Trey Hendrickson, who is one of the best edge rushers in all of football, to pair with Montez Sweat. That would be a fearsome unit. And we still have a first round pick while just sending away one of the second rounders that we had. So we fix our biggest defensive need. And then we still have 2 top round picks to play with. Yep. Oh, okay. Yeah. Happy.
100%. And I'm sure there's a lot of teams out there that would be willing to make a move for a guy like Trey Hendrickson at the age he's at. You are going to have to pay him, and I think that's probably part of the reasoning that the Bengals are allowing him to look for a trade, because they're like, we've got so much money in Joe Burrow, we're going to have to make Jamar Chase the highest paid wide receiver, and we either pay T. Higgins or we franchise tag him. If we tag him, he's making way more than if we just paid him. They should just pay him. But those 3 alone are going to eat up so much of their cap space that they're looking at Trey Hendrickson going, we can't pay you what you want. And if we don't trade you now, then you're just going to walk at the end of next year and we get nothing for you.
Yeah, it
But
is like what we said. The Bengals are playing on very, very thin ice here at the moment because again, like a lot of these moves, if Trey Hendrickson gets traded, if T. Higgins plays out the year and then just walks in free agency, if Jamar Chase says, you know what, I'm not going to deal with the franchise tag stuff, you pay me what I'm deserved, and then he gets traded. Well, guess what? Joe Burrow's just going to say, I'm gone, and it's not even a discussion. I won't play. I won't do anything. You're just going to lose me, so just trade me now.
yeah,
And the Bengals are going, they are playing on thin ice with they're driving around on thin ice with a tank here at the moment, where it's like you are testing your fate at every single spot. But there was a lot of cuts that ultimately happened over these last couple of days that ultimately kind of gave us a little bit of shock. And not necessarily shock, but of going like, oh wow, like this guy's getting cut, like that's a big time player. And that kind of first started with Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa got cut from the Chargers, and this was kind of one of those things that was rumored throughout most of the season. It was like, okay, Joey Bosa, he's not able to stay healthy. He's not as productive as he once was. He's costing us a lot of money. He's probably going to be a cut scenario at the end of this year. And of course, he ended up getting cut. So that's not necessarily a shock. And then after that, the Jaguars decided to cut Ronald Darby, corner, Josh Reynolds, a wide receiver, Evan Ingram, their receiving tight end, and then Devin Duvernay, also a wide receiver. While also they announced that they were planning to cut Christian Kirk as well, but then the Houston Texans swooped in and ultimately got a deal done for a trade where it was something like they got Christian Kirk for like a 7th round pick. So the Jags cutting a lot of people, but then the day afterwards, we see that Jonathan Allen gets cut. Then we also see Harold Landry get cut. So a handful of big time players ultimately getting moved on. And before I forget, also Tyler Lockett getting cut as well. So there's a lot of like experienced, talented guys hitting the open market way before free agency even starts.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense to see it the weekend before free agency, letting these guys go to you know, solidify what you've got available in the cap, and for some situations to open up some cap space to facilitate a trade. That's one that I was speculating with, say, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Cooper Kupp it's looking like that's his likely landing spot now from a lot of the sources I'm seeing, just because he has that experience with Cohen. It's only a 2 years left on his deal, but it's a hefty contract. So the Jags were going to have to free up some space, and he will ultimately just be the number one there with Trevor Lawrence throwing on the ball. Some of the others were surprising because big names, but also not surprising just because of what's been going on with the team, like Jonathan Allen. He expressed last year that he was done with Washington. He wanted out. And even with a better year this year, it seems as though that attitude hasn't changed. I'm a little surprised they weren't able to find a trade partner for, a player swap or something for Jonathan Allen just to get a little bit back for him. But if he doesn't want to be there, ultimately the best thing for you to do is just get rid of him, especially for a young team like Washington, where it's like, we're looking to build for the future. If you don't want to be here for that, then go. And Jonathan Allen, I expect to be probably one of the early day signings. With him now being available, he is a good D lineman, great up the middle. He will fit in a lot of defensive tackle schemes for a lot of these teams. So I fully expect him to get signed somewhere on day one.
Yeah, like again, also like a guy like Harold Landry. This was a guy that over the last 3 years has 30 sacks. So like he's a double digit guy pretty much the last 3 years in a row. And Harold Landry is definitely more of a 3-4 outside linebacker type edge rusher as opposed to a 4-3 hand in the dirt every single play defensive end. But like that's a guy that is still fairly valuable, and you would have expected the Titans to get at least some sort of trade package, whether it was like a 5th round, 6th round type pick those sort of deals. Same thing with Jonathan Allen. Now, with Jonathan Allen, again, his contract was fairly high, and we know how much resources that the Commanders have put into that defensive line. Because even going to not last year, but the year before, they ended up drafting a. Actually, I think Washington had 2 first-round picks last year, and they ended up drafting another defensive lineman. Or might have been the year before. I can't fully remember off the top of my head. Nonetheless, but they have defensive tackles that they can fall back on. I know Jerron Payne was a guy that they ultimately signed to a long-term extension last year. Yeah, Jonathan Allen, Harold Landry are both going to be very valuable guys to have. And again, you look at a guy like Joey Bosa. This is another valuable guy that you can have. Now, if he's likely going to be in a rotational role, but to have that as a rotational player is pretty good. You know, guy like Evan Ingram, that's not a bad receiving tight end for a team that needs maybe like a tight end 2 on their offense to just catch some extra of those passes. Tyler Lockett, by no stretch of the imagination, is a bad guy to have come be like a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 on your team.
Yep. Yeah, Tyler Lockett, we've seen him. He's been a perennial guy where he will consistently convert those third downs for you. He's a great slot receiver. There's going to be a lot of teams that'll scoop him up, and it likely won't be for very much because he's older, but he doesn't take a lot of hits, so that's why he's able to keep playing. He doesn't get injured. He gets the ball, he gets down. And so I don't expect him to be sitting on the free agency market for very long either.
Yeah, a lot of these interesting cuts that have ultimately come to fruition. And again, we often see this week where a lot of teams ultimately will cut guys to get a little bit more compliant with the salary cap, because again, you have to be compliant with the salary cap going into the new league year on Wednesday. Otherwise, you start to get some fines, and we'll see some restructures. We often see a lot of this, but this year more than ever, I feel like we've seen some more older top end guys kind of get released more so than normal. Because again, a guy like Joey Bosa, you see like maybe one of those guys a year where it's like, oh, like that's unfortunate that he's getting cut, but it makes sense because he's older, you know, a little bit injury prone, and his team is trying to get younger and cheaper. Like, yeah, we see that. But then you also added the Jonathan Allen, the Tyler Lockett, the Harold Landry. We're like, oh, okay, like these are all still players in the NFL. Like, you are going to get a lot of value from these guys, and you don't necessarily see a lot of those guys as often as we have this year.
No, and I think last year sort of started the precedent for this. We saw a lot of teams, especially on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary, where they went cut happy. You know, the Bills were the leaders of that. They cut almost their entire defense last year. And I think teams saw that and then saw how successful the Bills still were, and were like, maybe we don't need to be overpaying for some of these guys that are a little bit older. They got really good contracts at the time, but now they're not great contracts anymore, and it's later in those deals where there's not as much of a cap penalty to let them go. And so I think that's why we're seeing that, and it might be something we see trending over the next few years because this league is going so much towards offensive production, and that's where all the money is. And so teams are freeing up the money to pay their offensive players and going, we will just patchwork our defense. If we've got good enough offense, we don't have to be a top 5 defense to get into the playoffs. And so I'm both surprised and not surprised, and I do expect to see this trend likely continue for the next year or two.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see with the salary cap and a lot of that sort of stuff. And I think it's more teams looking at deals going, man, like, why are we paying this deal for a player? We can just get out of it. Let's just get out of it. Let's not try to snowball this thing any longer than it needs to be. And it's going to be really interesting. I like the point that you make that we're going to see probably potentially a lot more of this over the next couple of years, which is a likely situation that's going to happen, but it has been a little bit of a shock this year. But yeah, speaking of players and contracts that could potentially come back to bite them in the ass, Brock Purdy and the San Francisco 49ers have kind of started their conversation about a extension for Brock Purdy. And like Brock Purdy, hate Brock Purdy, he's been productive for the 49ers. He's been exactly what you would hope from a pick quarterback and more so. And let's be honest here, whether you like Brock Purdy or not, he's a top 10, 15 quarterback in this NFL. Whether it is the roster that he's on making him that way or not. Like he's just simply been productive. Kyle Shanahan loves Brock Purdy. And it makes sense for them to ultimately sign him to an extension. He's realistically been the best quarterback on that roster for a very, very long time. And we found out some of the details earlier this week of some of the numbers that have been thrown out for Brock Purdy's way. And the opening number was $45 million a year. And at that point, I'm kind of sitting back going like, that seems like it is a very low number from the 49ers to start this process at.
It is, but I mean, I also do kind of understand it. Brock Purdy was still an afterthought of a draft pick, Mr. Irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's been productive, but again, that's productive on a team full of all-stars with arguably a top 3 head coach play caller in the league right now. And so I've expressed it multiple times over the last couple of years that you throw any quarterback to Kyle Shanahan and he's going to have that kind of production. Like it's going to be a good match. And so I think that's sort of what the 49ers are looking at. They're going, we're already pushing the cap. We had to move Debo out. We're looking for a partner for Ayuk. George Kittle's getting up there. He's going to retire. Christian McCaffrey, was this a one-off year or is he back into his cycle of injuries all the time? Like, yes, you've got some good talent back behind him, but again, that falls to the coaching of Kyle Shanahan. And so I think for the 49ers, they're looking at it going, we don't value you as the number 1 paid quarterback in the league. I agree with them, looking at it, they could go out there. They could probably be just as successful with Justin Fields, Sam Darnold, like Russell Wilson, anybody that's available if they needed to be. They could arguably draft another quarterback and fill that role with him. There would be the growing pains, but you then have the opportunity to reset that rookie deal. I don't know. I like Brock Purdy. He is a great game manager. He is a great guy to have under center. But we see the flaws when all that talent isn't out there. We saw several times this year, no Christian McCaffrey, no Debo Samuel, no Brandon Ayuk, no George Kittle. And the 49ers struggled against mediocre teams. And so that would be a big concern for me. You put all this money into Brock Purdy, and then you can't retain any of the talent. And you go, okay, now Brock Purdy, you have to be the star of this team. And I don't think Brock Purdy is that guy.
Yeah, and I think you and I are both in a similar boat of going, Brock Purdy is a good quarterback, but is he a quarterback you're winning because of? I think both of us kind of sit at that point and go, probably not. Like, you can win with this quarterback, and you have definitely won with this quarterback. Are you winning because of this quarterback? And, Brock Purdy and his agent, they're 100% going to be saying, yeah, you can win. You can win because of me. And the first offer of $45 million a year, I'm just looking at all of the quarterbacks' contracts. He would be making the same amount of money as Kirk Cousins and Patrick Mahomes. And both of those guys are not that high up on that list. We have Dak Prescott at $60 million, Joe Burrow and Jordan Love and Trevor Lawrence all at $55, Tua and Jared Goff both at $53, Herbert at $52, Lamar Jackson at $52, Jalen Hurts at $51, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson both at $46, and then at again the $45, Kirk Cousins, Mahomes, Josh Allen is $43, Matt Stafford is $40, Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr at $37, Baker Mayfield at $33, and Geno Smith at $22. So if you're Brock Purdy, you're sitting back going like, okay, I have been a starting quarterback for 2.5 years. In those 2.5 years, I have made it to an NFC championship game twice. I've made it to a Super Bowl once, and we missed the playoffs this last year. How many guys on this list can say that they have made it to multiple championship games and then, made it to one Super Bowl? Dak Prescott can't say that he's made it to an NFC championship game. Joe Burrow made it to a Super Bowl. We recognize Joe Burrow as one of the very best. Jordan Love hasn't made it to an NFC championship game. Trevor Lawrence hasn't. Tua hasn't. Jared Goff, he's made it to an NFC championship game, but not a Super Bowl. Justin Herbert hasn't. Lamar hasn't. Jalen Hurts made it to 2 Super Bowls and a couple of NFC championship games. Kyler Murray hasn't. Deshaun Watson hasn't. Kirk Cousins hasn't. Mahomes, obviously, he's Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen has made it to the AFC championship game multiple times, but hasn't gone there. But pretty much, we're not going to talk about anyone else on that list because Josh Allen, we all know, is underpaid. But if you're Brock Purdy, you're sitting back going like, I should be paid more than Jordan Love and Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa. They haven't done half the things that I have done, and I've only been playing for 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, and two of those that I'll comment on is Dak Prescott. I kind of wipe out of those numbers because this is Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones is terrible at structuring his deals. We all felt Dak was overpaid when that happened.
Oh, massive.
I still think that's the case.
Yeah.
And I will note that Jared Goff has been to a Super Bowl. It was pre.
Oh, you're right. He has made it to a Super Bowl.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Jared Goff, I think deserves a little more credit there. But when I look at those other deals, Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa especially, those are teams that are desperate to have a franchise guy. And so they overpaid for their guys to keep them there. So Brock Purdy needs to look at that and go, okay, well, do I just want to be the next in that line? Like, yeah, you've already been to those big dances, but that's because the team was already built when you came in. Those other guys were the building blocks for what they wanted to build up. That is a fundamental difference. Jordan Love, yeah, we all thought that was a little bit out of left field when he got paid last year. But honestly, like with where all those contracts are, $45 million, because they don't have to re-sign him this year. They've still got him for next season.
Yep.
And so a starting point of 45 makes perfect sense to me because that allows Brock Purdy's camp to come back and go, well, no, we want 60. We're better than Dak Prescott. We should be up there. And then that allows the team to go, well, no, let's go 48. And I could see the meeting somewhere in the middle around that 50 to 53 million. And that would be a suitable price to pay for Brock Purdy. I would not go as high as 55. I would definitely not go above 55 for Brock Purdy because, as I've said, you can get guys like Sam Darnold or Justin Fields or any of these rookies that are coming up in this year's draft, next year's draft, the year after, for significantly less than 55. Like, you're not going to pay Sam Darnold 55 million. You're not going to pay Justin Fields probably even 45 million. And so you got to look at that and go, I think this was a good starting spot. It's not insulting to Brock Purdy, in my opinion. I think that is where the starting place for most quarterbacks are going to be if you're already a starter. But this 49ers team is looking at it going, we need to see more from you this year if you want us to come up in price. Because let's say the 49ers enter this season, we know no Deebo Samuel. Say they find a trade partner for Brandon Ayuk, so no Brandon Ayuk. That means Juwan Jennings and George Kittle and whoever they happen to draft are going to be their top targets. I think they have one other there, Ricky Pearsall, who they drafted last year. So they've got some young talent that's possible, but none of those are on the level of a guy like a Deebo Samuel. And then we have to see what sort of shape Christian McCaffrey's in. If this team can then rebound and win their division, make it to the playoffs, and get back to a championship game, then I could see Brock Purdy elevating his value to that $55 million range. But it has to be because of him, not just with him.
Yeah, and you and I totally are on agreement with this. I still think Brock Purdy needs to show a little bit more that he can be that 55-60 million dollar quarterback, because again, when you walk into a super team and you do the things that you did, like you're looking at it going like, yeah, there's clearly skill and talent there for you to be able to go do that, because you have to, just because you have all the best weapons and all the best coaches and all this, that, and the other thing doesn't necessarily mean you're still going to be successful. You still have to be good yourself to get a lot of that to go, but it sure as hell makes it a lot easier when you basically are just able to walk into that. And we saw this year the 49ers have to deal with injuries and kind of see a little bit of that. Like, what is Brock Purdy going to look like without the super team? And you know,
Exactly. And does Brock Purdy want to be one of those guys who is going for the paycheck? Or does he want to be one of those guys who goes, I'm willing to take a little bit less so that you can keep more weapons around me and get more new weapons, more new shiny playthings for me so that we can be successful? You know, you look at guys like Patrick Mahomes, who, you know, there's arguments that he's the best. And he's only making 45. Now, I get that was a contract signed like 4 years ago,
Yep.
so that's why. But look at what Patrick Mahomes can do with almost no weapons available to him.
Yeah.
You know, and so
you're
that
winning
is a
because of
fundamental
him
difference,
as opposed to winning with him.
right?
And yeah, it's like, I get it from the 49ers perspective. Like there's of
Yep.
course, like when you go into a negotiation, the team that is ultimately, or the party that is ultimately going to be having to pay the price, they are going to try to give you the cheapest deal that they possibly can. Like, I get it. Like that's a standard practice in negotiation. Whenever people get new jobs, the standard practice is to never take the first offer from, in terms of what pays, and going like, you always go, okay, well, what's the best offer that you can possibly do? Can we do a little bit, like, that's standard negotiating practice. And you know that the 49ers are throwing that out there going, listen, this puts you into really good quarterback conversations, and it gives us the ability to still have a lot. And, you know, Brock Purdy's camp is going to look at that and go, like, okay, like, we want 60. And then, like what you said, okay, well, we'll budge to 48 million. And going like, okay, what about 58? And then you kind of get to that realm of 53. Like, this is the early stage of negotiation. But yeah, it's...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to add in like some, you know, bonuses and stuff, some performance bonuses to sweeten that pot for sure. But like, look at some of the other teams. Let's use Joe Burrow as an example, the second highest paid quarterback. And look at what the Bengals are going through right now. They paid him so much money, and now they're struggling just to keep two good, talented targets for him. And then the defense is bad. Can Brock Purdy, you know, getting $60 million a year, can you will your team to 40 plus points a game so that you have a chance to maybe make the playoffs? Is Brock Purdy that good? And then another guy I talk about is CJ Stroud, who already has come out and said, hey, when my time is up, I want to take less because I want more talent here. He wants to use the Tom Brady method. I'm going to make less yearly. I'm still going to get generational wealth, but there's going to be so much talent around me. We will be a perennial threat that can make it to the playoffs every year, possibly to the championship game every year, and win some Super Bowls.
Yeah,
That's where
whenever
Brock
I
Purdy...
hear guys say like, oh, like years down
Yeah.
the road, like, oh, I'm gonna totally do the Tom Brady approach, and then, you know, they get record-setting deal. It's like, what happened with that Tom Brady approach? Because, like, as much of a fan as Joe Burrow as I am, he said all those similar things of where it's like, I don't need like the highest paid quarterback money. Is like, you pay me a decent deal, let me keep all of my guys, and then it's like, oh, we're gonna give you 55 million. It was like, okay. Like, yeah, sure. And so, like, it's all fun and games until I see one. Like, for instance, if CJ Stroud in 2 years signs a $30 million a year contract, I'll be like, oh, damn, like, he's taking that serious.
Oh, I mean,
But
in
until
3
that
years,
point, yeah.
even signing a 40 or 45 million in 3 years will be that deal sort of contract,
Yep.
and that's just it. Joe Burrow keeps talking about, oh, I want to keep all these guys. You should sign all these guys. That's a point where the management should look at him and go, well, can we tack 2 years onto your contract and spread this out a little more so we have more cap space then? Restructure your deal so that we can afford these guys? But there's no talk of that.
Yep.
Money ultimately talks. And you're right. We'll see with CJ Stroud if that's true when it comes time to sign on that dotted line, if he's still willing to put up, what he's stated. But for me, like, I look at that and I go, that is the recipe for success for a quarterback in the league right now, is not being the top paid guy. It's being the guy that can go, I'm good with being top 20 paid as long as we can keep talent around me. And I'm sure we'll see a lot more talks between the 49ers and Brock Purdy. I don't expect them to get a deal done now. I wouldn't be surprised to see them get the deal done before the season starts. That is still a possibility if we see some of those player incentives and a bit of wiggle room on that cost. But if the 49ers give in and make Brock Purdy the highest paid quarterback, then I think we continue to see the decline of the San Francisco 49ers over the next 5 years, because we've talked about it the last 2 off seasons. They are pushing right up against that cap, and those pains are going to start hitting them. That's why they had to ship out Deebo Samuel. That's why they're now looking at the Brandon Ayuk contract going, oh, we fucked up. We shouldn't have signed him to that deal.
Yeah. It is going to be really interesting to see ultimately what that number gets to. And who knows? Maybe Brock Purdy comes by and just says, yeah, I'll take that $45 million. That's, $44 million more than what I'm currently making per season.
100% it is, yep.
And yeah, but another team that has ultimately set a record-setting deal, speaking of that, that the Las Vegas Raiders, they knew they needed to get a deal done with Max Crosby, and well, boy oh boy, did they get that deal done very nicely. And so Max Crosby signed a 3-year extension worth $106.5 million, including actually, just let me read this a little bit better. So yeah, he signed his deal for $106.5 million, including $91.5 million guaranteed, an average annual salary of $35.5, which is the most by a non-quarterback player in history. So again, Max Crosby sticks around with the Raiders, 27 years old, one of the best edge rushers in all of football. The Raiders, they didn't mess around with that. They said, you know what? We are keeping you here. And you look at that deal, man, you go, okay, that's the type of deal where if you're, for instance, the Cowboys or the team that eventually has Myles Garrett or the Pittsburgh Steelers, you got to look at that and go, oh, we're going to have to pay our guys even more than that. Because you know for a fact that Micah Parsons, he's going to be sitting back going like, I'm just as good as Max Crosby. And if you're TJ Watt, you're sitting back going like, I'm definitely better than Max Crosby. How many more Defensive Player of the Year awards do I have? How many more seasons with more sacks do I have? Like, whoo.
Right. But you also have to look at this and question, was this the right move for the Raiders?
I think so.
That's a lot of money to be paying to a guy when you don't have a lot of other pieces in place to be successful. And so you're paying that guy, sure, but you're paying him to not be a playoff team, because that's ultimately where the Raiders sit currently. You look at them and you go, they are not playoff caliber. They've got some good young talent. If they have a really good draft this year, that could shift by the time we get to preseason. But as it stands right now, they're not. And you look at some of these other teams. I look at those 3 guys specifically, and for a lot of teams out there, especially contenders, I'd be hesitant to pay those guys that extra money. If anything, I look at that and I go, that's a good reason to maybe shop around and see what's out there for TJ Watt. And, that's more reason for the Browns to want to ship Myles Garrett out. But at the same time, that's going to make it harder for teams to be willing to trade for those guys because that's a hefty price tag. $35 million for an edge rusher, which is a very physical position where we see a lot of injuries happen. We've seen a lot of seasons where Max Crosby doesn't finish the year, doesn't play the full season.
Well, we
Same
only
with
saw
TJ
that
Watt.
last year.
But I mean, that's a valid point, though. That's a physical spot, especially with a lot of the chip blocks that happen now. Knee injuries, leg injuries are common with edge rushers right now.
Yep.
And so we've seen it with all of these guys. All four of them that have been mentioned. And so that is a very big risk reward contract, in my opinion. Like, yes, Max Crosby should have been paid. I don't think he should have been paid highest contract that's not a quarterback money.
The way that I look at it is the Raiders, they're in their rebuilding phase here at the moment. But when you're in this phase, you want to look at your own players and reward them. And I think Max Crosby, again, only 27 years old, so it's not like he's insanely old. By the end of this contract, the oldest he'll be is 31. So you're getting him locked up in his prime. And you know what? With Pete Carroll coming in, this team is going to have the floor go from here all the way up to here. And they're going to be a better team and a better organization. Now, they need to figure out that quarterback situation. And if you listen to any of our stuff before and you've heard me talk about team building, you can have the greatest team. If you don't have an effective quarterback, it means piss all. It means nothing. For instance, look at the Steelers these last couple of years. And with the Raiders, this is just a team and an organization. I think they will take being a playoff team for 3 or 4 years, but not necessarily making it past that wild card round. Like, I think they would be looking at going, if we could be the Steelers of where, we have a couple of good years and we just make the playoffs consistently and we're still trying to get that, they would take that. Because let's be honest here. Do we remember the last time the Raiders won a playoff game? Early 2000s. Last time they won a playoff game was a Super Bowl. Last time they made the playoffs was when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl, and before that, it was a long gap. Like, this is a team and an organization that has struggled for years and years and years and years. And now, I've always talked about it's either you're competing for a Super Bowl or you're not. But there are some organizations right now that simply just need to look at it and go, we would just like to compete for a couple of back-to-back. Like, let's just say, let's go out there and compete for 4 years of playoffs, making it to the playoffs for 4 years in a row. Because that sometimes is all it needs to take an organization that has just been down in the absolute dumps for years and years and years and years, and then finally gets them into this right track way of going like, okay, you know what? We are capable of doing a little bit more, and this is the move that we need to make because this is a smart move, and we've been making that. I look at the Bears and go, you know what, with Ben Johnson, if we make the playoffs this year, I'm going to be happy. We could get bounced in the wild card round and it make it look ugly. I would be happy with playoffs this year because that shows progress. And I think this Max Crosby move is one of those things of going, we have a guy locked up for this long term. And you know what? This deal is very, very high, but we know for a fact that when this deal is over, it's not going to be looked at as that bad of a contract.
Oh, no, definitely not. And I mean, at his age, like you are right, it is good to lock him up to this in his prime. I mean, this basically is the same deal that TJ Watt got 4 years ago when he signed his extension. He became the highest paid defensive player ever at $30 million a year. And that was when he was 27. And so it does make sense. It does track. And it does set that precedent for a lot of the other younger edge rushers to get paid. Guys like Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, I don't know if it necessarily pushes their value up to above that 35 because those guys are a little bit older, are a little bit more injury prone. And so even with TJ Watt coming up, say, next year, I don't know if he gets 35.5. Or if he does, it's on a much shorter term. It's a 2-year deal. It's something like that.
Yeah.
And so it is a good deal for the Raiders because, like you said, they're young. They're not bringing in a lot of other outside free agent talent that they're going to have to spend money on. It's going to be basically a team made up of rookie deals. And by the time they have to pay a lot of these contracts, that's where Max Crosby's getting into his 30s, and maybe you don't have to pay him quite as much. So, I mean, it is a good deal for the Raiders, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Micah Parsons more than anything, because he is the other young guy that's going to be up for a contract, and the Cowboys don't have enough to pay that sort of money.
Yeah, that's a move where the Raiders are looking at the Cowboys going, ha ha ha, like have fun with that one, fellas. But another team that is also looking to trade away one of their superstars, and funny enough, this actually works into what the Raiders were doing with Max Crosby, is the Seattle Seahawks. We already talked about them cutting Tyler Lockett. But yeah, shortly after that came out, DK Metcalf notified the Seahawks that he wants to be traded. And the Seahawks were kind of like, we don't really want to do this, but like, here's your price tag. If someone wants to give us a first and a third for him, that's all it's going to take. Which, yeah. I mean, for a guy like DK Metcalf, 27, 28 years old, has been a really solid wide receiver throughout the NFL. There are teams where he can be a number one wide receiver for. And he's a physical specimen. And it is a situation where you look at it and go, like, man, like, Seattle Seahawks, we talked about how the Browns were playing with fire and how the Bengals were playing with fire. When that news for DK Metcalf came out, it was like, ooh, you guys are playing with fire. Again, you cut Tyler Lockett, sure, that's fine, and you have Jackson Smith and Jigba and DK. If you get rid of DK Metcalf, ooh, we were all sitting back going, who the hell is Geno Smith going to throw the ball to? And then, again, last night, the Seahawks said, well, Geno Smith is going to be throwing footballs to Brock Bowers. And all of Seattle was like, so you're telling us you're getting rid of Lockett, you're going to trade away DK Metcalf, and you trade Geno Smith away? Who's going to be doing anything on this team?
Yeah, it's going to be a tough uphill climb for this Seahawks team for sure. That DK Metcalf deal is going to be hard to get done too, because much like Myles Garrett, he probably wants to go to a contender, but he also is in the last year of his contract, and you're going to have to give him a $30 million deal. And so he's likely not going to want to go somewhere where he's just going to be a rental for this season. He's going to want that $30 million deal. And there's not a lot of teams out there that are going to just jump at that opportunity. I can think of one or two, but there's not a lot. And honestly, most of those are picking so high in the draft that they wouldn't want to part with a high first-round draft pick. Like if you're in that 25 to 32 range, then yeah, I'd say it's worth a first-round pick for DK Metcalf.
Yep.
But anything in the top 20, I don't think it's worth sending back for a guy like DK Metcalf.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation because a team that I've heard linked very much with this DK Metcalf talk is, for instance, the New England Patriots. They, without a doubt, can afford to get DK Metcalf the contract that he wants. Meaning, like, I'm pretty sure just looking at how much cap space they have, the most cap space in the NFL at $125 million. So yeah, they can afford to give him $40 million if he so chooses. Again, the Patriots are not going to give DK Metcalf $40 million a year, but they could do it if they want to.
Yeah.
It makes sense for them to go out there and trade for a wide receiver of DK Metcalf's stature because, again, you need to get a wide receiver for Drake May. But you're not trading away the third overall or the fourth overall pick in the draft for DK Metcalf. That kind of sits you back and go, will Seattle be willing to take the 38th pick in the draft, which the Patriots have? I know that's not necessarily what you were hoping for with a first, but it's still a high up second round pick. And with the way this draft class is, with that 38th spot, you could get yourself a pretty decent player. It doesn't necessarily need to be a receiver, but you can get yourself a starting caliber player on this team. And DK Metcalf gets to go to an up-and-comer with a quarterback that looks like he could be somewhat decent, and he's going to get paid the contract that he wants. But it's a really, really interesting situation because, again, if Seattle has already set the price of a first and a third, and that's the only thing that's going to get them to budge, that takes them out of a bunch of teams. Because, for instance, like, let's say, looking at the draft class here, you are, let's say you're the Dallas Cowboys. Would you be willing to trade the 12th overall pick? Okay, the Cowboys are a terrible example in this expression because they probably would trade the 12th overall pick for DK Metcalf and still give him $40 million. But again, we look at the Colts, for instance. They need some more, like, they have a good receiver room, but would you be willing to do that? Falcons, the Cardinals. Imagine pairing DK Metcalf with Marvin Harrison Jr. Are the Cardinals going to be willing to spend the 16th pick, and will the Seahawks even be willing to trade it to that team?
Right,
but yeah,
within the division.
But once you get past that 20 mark, again, Denver is a suitor. The Steelers could be a suitor. DK Metcalf could look really good with the Chargers. Packers are a team that could definitely use it. The Texans are a team that could very much use that. The Ravens, the Commanders, the Bills, and yeah, like all those teams could potentially be that way. But they might just look at it and go, we don't really want to pay a wide receiver who's going to be 28, $35 million a season.
Yeah, and that's just it. A lot of those teams you listed, they're in that cap trouble already. You know, teams like the Texans, where they've still got that Stephon Diggs contract that they're paying out. So can you afford DK Metcalf? You know?
Yeah, right now with the Texans, they only have $5.2 million of cap space, so you can't even really do that.
Well, exactly. And you got to remember, like, the contract and everything that's signed, that wouldn't kick in until next season. So It's available cap for next season.
Yeah, no, they only have $5.2 million for next season here at the moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You know, so you've got teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers who will have that cap space next season.
Yep, Steelers have $63 million of cap space going into 2025.
Well, yeah, I'm talking going into 2026 is when the new contract for a DK Metcalf would be.
Yes.
No, like, yeah, you're paying out the rest of this year, which I think this year he's set to make, 17, 19, somewhere in there.
So DK Metcalf in 2025, his cap hit is going to be $31.875 million.
Oh, I didn't think it was quite that high already, but either way, like, it's going to be tough for a lot of these teams, and a lot of them, you look at that first round pick, and I'll use Pittsburgh again, and you go, do we want to bring in a guy, pay him $30 million a year for our first overall pick, that we're already looking at bringing in a guy like Igbuka with the draft pick and going, we're paying him rookie money for the next 4 years instead? And yeah, do we know he's going to be as productive as DK Metcalf? No. But we don't even know if DK Metcalf's going to be productive enough depending on who our quarterback is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's tough. A first and a third, I think, is a bit of a hefty asking price for DK Metcalf. I think what's ultimately going to happen is we're going to see what Cooper Kupp gets moved for first. And then you can probably tack an extra round, maybe 2 rounds, onto the value for a DK Metcalf. But not much more than that. I fully expect Cooper Kupp to be moved for a third or a fourth. And so a second and a third rounder for DK Metcalf is a much more reasonable asking price. I don't think you're getting a first round pick for him, though, Seattle.
Yeah, I think that is a little bit of a crazy option. But again, we're talking about this section of both the Raiders and the Seahawks, mainly because, again, they made that trade for Geno Smith. And you look at the Raiders and you go, sending a third round pick for Geno Smith. I actually really like that move for the Raiders because it guarantees you who your quarterback is going to be next year. Now, is Geno Smith going to win you playoff games and be a guy that you're going to count on? No, but you know what? He gives you that floor, and you're not going to have to overpay for a guy. You're sending a third round pick, the one that you received for the Devontae Adams trade. So you're using capital that you got from a previous move to go out there and better your team now. What was funny about that was the Raiders started talking about this trade at the Combine, and the first initial offer was the Seahawks saying, we will give you DK Metcalf and Geno Smith for Max Crosby. And after the Raiders finally stopped laughing, they said, no, like, let's continue to work with this. And then finally it got down to that situation of like, okay, we will give you Geno Smith for a third. Like, again, I love this trade for the Raiders because, again, you're getting a base player that is going to improve your team. I look at this from the Seattle Seahawks perspective and go, what the hell are you doing? Like, and the second that trade happened, all the rumors started saying, well, the Seahawks are now in the top contenders for Sam Darnold. And I go, that's great. But they do realize that there are other teams still going out there and trying to get Sam Darnold on their team. If you don't get Sam Darnold, you have now lost Tyler Lockett. You're probably going to lose DK Metcalf. And you lost Geno Smith. Mm-hmm. So now you're sitting in a position of where you're looking at things going, we don't have a quarterback. We're not in a position to get a quarterback in the draft. We have one wide receiver who is basically going to be put onto an island and said, you're not going to be able to do anything, Jackson Smith and Jigba, because we're just going to have two guys on you at all times, and whoever your quarterback is going to be, because I don't even know who the backup is in Seattle at the moment. Sam Howell, actually. So, like, it's just all sorts of, like, uh-oh.
Well, and this trade, when it dropped, it felt like a bit of a desperation maneuver as well, because there is a lot of speculation that the main reason DK Metcalf wanted out was he was tired of being overthrown and underthrown by Geno Smith.
Yeah.
You know, and Geno Smith was the reason he wanted out. So it really feels like maybe this was a, oh, okay, well, we'll get rid of Geno if you stay. You know, and so maybe the reason they're pursuing Sam Darnold so much is maybe DK Metcalf was like, well, of all the guys that are out there, that's the one I want the most. And so perhaps that is a way to appease him and keep him on the team, but maybe not. And if you don't land him, then definitely not. And so it's, yeah, the Seahawks are in a tough place right now because lacking that quarterback, they're not in a place to really appropriately draft one. They could definitely reach. They could take one of those second round quarterbacks in the first round, you know, to make sure they've got someone, but you're blowing a first round pick as a result. I don't know what the Seahawks are going to do, man. It's going to be interesting. They did trade for Sam Howell with the intent of having him replace Geno Smith when the contract was over. Maybe they saw something throughout practices last year where they're like, all right, we can do this now. So maybe they see something that we don't. But at the same time, I look at their head coach and go, well, you're a defensive guy. So what do you know? You know, you don't know that this quarterback's something. You're relying on your offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach to say, yeah, this could be our guy. So I don't know what the Seahawks are going to do. I don't know if they'll be able to retain DK Metcalf with the right quarterback signing, or if they're just going to be one of these teams that we see limp into the season and then complete fire sale all the way up to the trade deadline, moving guys like Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker just to recoup some stuff and begin a rebuild under McDonald.
Another interesting situation with this is that the Seahawks, they have a completely new offensive staff. They fired their OC and they brought in Cliff Kubiak to be their new offensive coordinator. So you can't even sit back and say, oh, like, you must have seen this from Sam Howell last year. It's a new staff. And even when Sam Howell played last year, he wasn't that good. No,
but that Seahawks team overall wasn't that good.
They won 10 games, so, you know, we'll give them that. But I kind of agree with you on that one. It's like this Seahawks team is playing with fire with a can of gasoline in one hand and a petrol bomb in the other. They're standing right at a fire and they're just going like da 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 da. Nothing's going wrong, and I was talking with our good buddy Will, who is a Seahawks fan,
Mm-hmm.
and he texted me, goes, "Why are we trading Geno Smith?" I went, "Well, who knows?" "And why are we targeting Sam Darnold?" I went, "Well, because he's probably the best option for you guys at this moment." And then finally he just sent, "How fucked are we?" on a scale of 1 to 10. And I went, right now, you're probably sitting at like a 6.5.
Yep.
If you get Sam Darnold and you keep DK Metcalf, you drop down to like a 4.5. If you don't get Sam Darnold and you lose DK Metcalf, you're at like a 9.5. If you get Sam Darnold but still have to trade away DK Metcalf, you're sitting at like a solid 5.5. Like
Yeah.
on like at no point is it good, but like it is. The Seahawks are making some very interesting moves, and the Raiders ultimately kind of benefited from that particular move in general, which, I mean, like, good for the Raiders for actually kind of finally having a little bit of a win here.
Well, yeah, and this is a win trade for the Raiders. You know, I look at it and we talked about it. They're just outside that window to get one of the top two quarterbacks this year. And so they knew that wasn't going to happen. But this also sets them up in a position where they go, well, we know we got Geno Smith. We got Pete Carroll, who's a really great offensive mind. We can still use our...
Defensive mind.
Is he?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, Pete Carroll.
Okay,
Pete Carroll was never the offensive guy.
No, okay.
Yeah.
But like, you've still got a high second round pick where you can go and go, well, if there's a guy like Quinn Ewers or Jackson Dart still available at that point, we can still grab one of these guys to be behind Geno Smith, and then when Geno's contract is up, we go, well, now we've got our guy.
Yep. It's a solid move to set yourself up for the future.
Exactly.
Yep.
So it's a good move for them for sure. Getting somebody who you know can be a starter in this league, because we know that anything they've already got on the roster is not capable of it.
Yep.
And so it's a good move for the Raiders. They didn't have to overpay for it. You know, like you said, it wasn't even their third. It was the third from the Jets. And so good move for the Raiders. Thin ice for Seattle right now, though. It's going to be very dicey over the next couple of weeks. We'll have to see how their free agency plays out to determine what ends up happening with DK Metcalf. Because as teams sign wide receivers as well, that's going to shrink that market availability for DK Metcalf.
Speaking of another team that is potentially also going to be in the Sam Darnold sweepstakes is your Pittsburgh Steelers. And ultimately, for me, we have been talking about this Pittsburgh Steelers team and their quarterback situation and them being in a horrific spot. And I know for you are sitting firmly in the park of it should probably be Justin Fields, but a part of me got me thinking of, if the Steelers had the choice, who would they rather have? Would they rather have Sam Darnold or would they rather have Justin Fields? I know where I would probably go with in this department. I'm wondering, if it came down to a situation, would you rather have Sam Darnold or Justin Fields?
I would rather have Justin Fields.
Really?
Justin Fields, he is the second most athletic quarterback in the league behind Lamar Jackson.
Uh-huh.
We saw great strides from him last year in the 6-game sample that we got.
I wouldn't say great strides. He made decent strides.
He looked better with arguably a worse offensive coordinator. You know what I mean? And so, and on a new team, like, I liked what I saw from him last year. And we've talked about it for a couple years now, where that 26-year-old, that's kind of the sweet spot for quarterbacks. That's when they have their breakout year very often. And that is what this season is for Justin Fields. And I feel like he's primed for that. Now, the Steelers are going to have to make him some promises. You know, they're going to have to guarantee him the starting job. You know,
which they're already not. Which, from some of the rumors that I've seen, they have already started to state that Justin Fields, he isn't guaranteed the starting job.
Isn't?
Isn't guaranteed the starting job.
Oh, see, because I've been seeing that, like, if they get him, he is. You know, the unfortunate thing is there seems to be a bit of at odds where it's the GM and a bunch of the coaches want Justin Fields, but Mike Tomlin and the Rooney family want Russell Wilson. And so that is where the disparity is happening right now in the debate. But like for me, if it's between Darnold and Fields, I want Justin Fields. We've seen what Justin Fields is capable of doing. We know Justin Fields can take a hit, which in the AFC North, you have to be able to get hit and get back up and be right back out there. Sam Darnold tends to see ghosts when that starts happening. And that worries me because then all of a sudden you got a guy who's running for his life, making bad decisions. We saw those bad decisions drop dramatically for Justin Fields last year, where if it wasn't there, he wasn't throwing it into double and triple coverage, throwing those interceptions. You know, he wasn't making those bad moves. Was he still scrambling outside the pocket and getting hit? Yes. But that was better than turning the ball over, in my opinion.
And
you know, and that is a good step in the right direction. And I think Justin Fields just has more upside to him, where Sam Darnold, while I think he made a great leap last year, I think a lot of that was Kevin O'Connell. And I think if he goes to a team with a defensive-minded head coach, we are going to see regression from him. Whereas Justin Fields, I don't see any regression. I only see room for growth if he stays with this team. Whereas Sam Darnold, we're not going to see the same Sam Darnold that we got last year. We're likely going to see the Sam Darnold that we had in San Francisco the year he was there, which was still serviceable.
He only played like one
not
game for
good
San
enough.
Francisco that year anyways.
Well, he played some games when Brock Purdy was injured. He played a couple of games that season. Yeah, he was in there a couple of times. But like that, for me, it's Justin Fields has got to be the one you pick, because you could probably get them for about the same price.
See, a part of me, like, again, like I've always been a big fan of Justin Fields, and I've always sat back and said I hope he does well. But for me, I still looked at Justin Fields this particular season where he did make some improvements from his game, where he wasn't making some of those ill-advised throws from what we saw in Chicago. But there was also still a lot of the things that we saw from him that were still there from his years in Chicago, where it was not being able to have a fast processor and pull the trigger, where he sees an open guy and he just doesn't hit them, and he chooses to elect to ultimately get out and throw the ball, which again, like we're not going to sit back and say like he was the greatest quarterback that has ever played or anything like this. But some stats that I ultimately saw on Justin Fields since entering the league: he's been sacked 151 times, which is the third most in the NFL.
Yep.
His sack rate is at 10.4%, which is the highest in the NFL. And his time to throw is 3.1 seconds, which is the longest time to throw in the NFL since 2021, since entering the league. And these were all things that we saw from year one in Chicago. And we're still seeing those things for year 4 when he was with the Steelers. And we talked about one of these situations with the Steelers of where we saw, and again, you made the point that the Rooney family and Mike Tomlin want Russell Wilson as opposed to Justin Fields. And we did see the offense get better under Russell Wilson last year. And so for me, I just sit back and I go, if the offense got better, even with Justin Fields at a 4-2 record and looking like the best version of himself that he's ever been, is it not smarter to go with the guy that has just shown that he has had success in the NFL? Now, I still think Sam Darnold is a massive, massive risk. Because again, coming from Minnesota where he had Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, he had a great run game with Aaron Jones, and he had Kevin O'Connell, who is arguably one of the smartest offensive minds in the NFL, going to a team like the Steelers, who have Arthur Smith calling plays. Who's your running back? Who's your wide receivers? You have Pat Fryermuth, but he's not TJ Hawkinson. And again, that question is there, but you kind of have to wonder of going, is it worth it to take that shot with Sam Darnold and go, can he elevate these guys, as opposed to the quarterback that has 3 of the stats that are the most determining factors of quarterback struggle and leading
Now,
3 of those.
those numbers you gave, that was across his entire career, correct?
Correct. Since entering the league at 2021.
And so I'm curious to see how those relate to what those numbers were in the 6 games with Pittsburgh. How much of those numbers are skewed by what went on in Chicago? Because we saw with Caleb Williams last year, he was running for his life, just like Justin Fields always did.
No, totally.
Whereas in Pittsburgh, it was a much improved offensive line. And yes, his processing was still lower, which I don't like to see. But what I did like throughout last season, after he was removed from that starter role, is there was a lot of mentoring going on between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Justin Fields was wearing the headset a lot. And I think that time of learning behind a veteran quarterback who had similar situations to him. Russell Wilson was often one of the most chased after quarterbacks, running for his life a lot, and found ways to settle his mind so that he was able to get those deep balls out. And I would like to see if he was able to teach that knowledge to Justin Fields. Because we got to see a lot of that. We saw that camaraderie. There wasn't any animosity between them after that switch was made. It wasn't any rift between them. And Russell Wilson really took Justin Fields under his wing and was coaching him after every drive. That was the first person he was going to every time, going, "Hey, this is what I saw. This is what happened. What did you see out there while I was there?" And I just, like I said, I feel like Justin Fields is primed to take that big step now. This will be the first opportunity, I believe, in his career where he could go from one year to the next with the same playbook and the same play caller.
He had 2 years of Luke Getsy.
Fair. So he did have that, but still, I just think it's the risk versus reward is the risk is sort of here with Justin Fields, whereas the reward goes up. And then Sam Darnold has that same level of reward, but the risk level is way lower. You could bring him in and all of a sudden just have a significant drop. And that's why I feel like Justin Fields should be the guy. Russell Wilson, no hate on him, but this team needs to either go full rebuild, which if you sign Russell Wilson, in my opinion, that's what you're doing. If you go Russell Wilson, then it's like, okay, we need to start trading guys away, get first round picks, tank, get a good quarterback next season, and go from there. Justin Fields, you can throw a 4-year deal on him and go, okay, this is a 4-year experiment, and we see what we can get out of it. But I don't dislike Sam Darnold, but if I have to choose between those two, Justin Fields is still the number one. And honestly, you put Justin Fields up against any of the available quarterbacks right now, including trade options like Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields is still my number one.
Yeah, fair. And I know this has been a topic of conversation throughout this week, where I know even some shows have been arguably having this conversation. And I sit back and I say, I don't think the Steelers would be successful with either of these guys, just for the multitude of reasons, where Sam Darnold's coming over with all of this level of success. And the 3 biggest numbers with Justin Fields is that slow processing. Again, we see that with the longest time to throw, the most sacks, the highest sack percentage. And for me, I look at the sack percentage being the highest, and I go, that's what's the worrisome. But again, he had the 6 games with the Steelers, so where were those numbers? But my thing is with the Steelers here at the moment, they are playing with a lot of fire and gasoline here at the moment, because we know the new league year starts. It starts on Wednesday, but it really starts on Monday. And we always record our podcasts on Saturday afternoon. And to this point, again, I'm sure like people have seen me looking over at my other monitor. I'm always monitoring Twitter to see if there's anything popping up for news wise. Nothing so far. The Steelers have been talking throughout this week, and there was a report like, oh, the Steelers are very much focusing all their efforts towards Justin Fields to get him re-signed. The clock is ticking, and it is getting really, really short because you have the rest of today, you have tomorrow, but I think once it gets to midnight in Pittsburgh on that Monday, I think Justin Fields' agent is going to say, listen, we are going to wait for the tampering period to open, and we are going to start having conversations with other teams. Because the Jets have been a team that has been talked about also a lot this week, that if Fields hits that open market, he's going to hit really, like he's going to be a prime target for the Jets to go after. And I just sit back and I go, if I was a Steelers fan at the moment, you gotta get that deal done with Fields today, because you can't walk into Monday with a deal not done.
Yeah, see, and from every report I've read, the deal is not getting done today. It was already discussed between agent and Khan that Justin Fields is going to see the free agent market.
Okay.
Because the Pittsburgh Steelers want to see what other teams are valuing him at, is ultimately what it is. And if he chooses to walk, so be it. You know, the Steelers have said they want him there, most of them at least. But they're not signing him before the tampering window is open. He will be testing free agency. That I know for sure. You know, we knew that 3 weeks ago. We knew that a deal was not getting done before free agency opened. That's why I haven't been watching it intently, you know, and that's also why, like, the Steelers have been linked to every quarterback that could potentially be available, because everybody's known that there will not be a deal done before free agency, including with Russell Wilson, because I think they look at that and go, well, Russell is not going to be the most sought after free agent. And so if Justin Fields signs somewhere else on day one, then we can redouble and go, okay, well, now it's going to be Russ. And we know Russell Wilson wants to stay in Pittsburgh, so I think he's willing to wait for that as well. But I mean, I've heard the Steelers linked to Sam Darnold and Kirk Cousins and Geno Smith at one time, and Derek Carr even last week, I heard. And so it doesn't, the reason there's all this talk is because there is so much unknown around what's going to happen at this quarterback position. Thankfully, outside of that, there wasn't really a lot free agency wise that Pittsburgh was going to be going after on day one. Like, yeah, they need a wide receiver, but they weren't going to go after one of the top wide receivers available. And so I think they felt like they could afford to wait till day 2 or 3 in free agency to determine which guy they're going to try to bring in. And so that's why they're letting Justin Fields test that market. They're going to let him go. They're going to see what the Jets are offering. They're going to see what the Titans are offering. And hopefully Justin Fields' agent doesn't just sign that contract and he goes to Pittsburgh and is like, this is what these teams are offering. What do you have, Pittsburgh? Because I think Pittsburgh is willing to pay up to that $45 million mark on a 4-year deal. Whereas I think a lot of these other teams are probably looking at only using him as a bridge on a 2 or 3 year deal, likely in that 35 to 40 million range. So I think Pittsburgh will pay more than what the Jets or the Titans would be willing to play. Because I think those are probably the two most prevalent teams that are going to be looking for him. Because any other teams that are going to be looking for a quarterback, you know, like the Browns, I think that would just be career suicide. I mean, I think the Jets is career suicide too myself.
Me too.
But if they offer him a buttload of money, like if they offer him 50, 55 million, by all means, Justin Fields, take that. Don't even come back to Pittsburgh. If a team offers you 50 plus, take it.
Yeah, for me, again, like I always say this, I want to see the Steelers do better in terms of this quarterback situation that they've been a part of. And I just look at it like this, and I go, my biggest worry if I was a Steelers fan of allowing Justin Fields to hit the open market is because, again, once 10 o'clock our time, likely noon
Yep.
Pittsburgh time, whenever the tampering window opens, we start to see deals come in quick. Like
Oh yeah.
it is almost basically 10 o'clock hits, Ian Rappaport, 30 seconds later, a team has signed so and so. And so you know for a fact that some of these conversations with agents have probably already started here at this moment. And in that sort of conversation, you would have to imagine that if the Steelers don't get him signed, Justin Fields could very easily be one of those first hour type signings. And if the
Yep.
Steelers, like you said, the hope for the Steelers would be that Justin Fields gets an offer from, let's say, the Jets, and his agent comes back to the Steelers and says, "This is what the Jets are offering. Match it or do better." But it could be a situation where the agent says to Fields, "This is the offer. Do you want to take it?" And he goes, "Yep." "Do you want to talk to Pittsburgh?" "Nope." And then you lose out on Justin Fields, and then the next pivot is going to be, okay, well, can we get Sam Darnold? And Sam Darnold's probably going to be the first domino to actually fall when it comes to the quarterback. I think it's going to be who gets Sam Darnold and then who gets Justin Fields. And so let's say the Seahawks get Sam Darnold and then you see the Jets get Justin Fields.
Yep.
Then at that point it's really Russell Wilson.
Yep. But I mean, even then, at least that makes the picture clearer for Pittsburgh.
Yep.
It's just as much as you and I would love for the Steelers to get the deal done before free agency, it was never an option. It was never an option for Pittsburgh because I think they had already talked to him. And I think him and his agent were like, we want to see what other teams are offering. And that's what it comes down to. Like they could have, like, Pittsburgh wouldn't do this, but maybe they could have offered him $50 million and he would have taken it. But I don't think Justin Fields is worth that.
Yeah, neither of us do.
Right? You look around the league and his actual value is probably somewhere in the $30 to $38 million per year range, in my opinion. I think Pittsburgh probably offered him about 40, somewhere around there, and he was like, I'm going to wait and see. And I respect that. I get it. For me, either way, we're going to see some clarity come into view here. It's either going to be Justin Fields is the guy for the next few years for Pittsburgh, and we can start working towards wide receivers and running backs, other positions. Or, like you said, the dominoes are going to fall. And we're going to be looking at, okay, well, we can sign Russell Wilson, or we can wait for the Falcons to cut Kirk Cousins and sign Kirk Cousins. And then I fully believe that the Pittsburgh Steelers, with their second round pick, draft either Quinn Ewers or Jackson Dart, whichever one might still be available at that point. I could even see Khan trading up to ensure he gets one of those, because those are sort of the two guys in this rookie class that this team is looking at. And I think Jackson Dart is the front runner, honestly. He is the most likely rookie that the Pittsburgh Steelers draft if they need to draft one. If Justin Fields is signed, I don't think they draft a quarterback this year. I think they wait till next year.
Now, speaking of both of those particular things, I went to Spot Rack, which is a great site for contracts and that sort of thing. They do a pretty solid job at putting market values on particular players, and their market value for Justin Fields is a 1-year deal for $6.5 million, where they, and typically this place does a relatively good job at kind of where they see, and they put up comparisons of other quarterbacks around that similar range of kind of different prices, and that's kind of where they ultimately came up with this number from what they've seen from production and that sort of thing. So a 1-year 6.5 million, it's technically 6.4, so I just rounded up, but it's one of those things you look at that and you go, man, like, obviously Fields is probably going to get more than a 1-year deal for 6.5 million, but like, this is just one of those things where it's like, that's kind of where a lot of people on the outside kind of value him, But when it goes to in terms of Jackson Dart, I do multiple mock drafts throughout the week. It's something that just keeps my mind going as more stuff goes on. And one of the things that I've ultimately been placing my thumb on, I know in the past couple weeks I've been saying the best place for Jackson Dart to go to is the Los Angeles Rams. But every single time that I have done a mock draft over this last week, Jackson Dart has been picked up by the Steelers at pick 20. Because at this point, like, Jackson Dart is going to be a first round pick this year. I don't think it's a question of if, ands, or buts. He will be a first rounder. I know Charles Davis had a mock draft. I love Charles Davis. He's one of my favorite people in football media. But he had Jackson Dart going third overall. And I went, Charles, like, I love you, buddy. But, like, no, that's not happening. But I could very easily see the Steelers drafting Jackson Dart at 20, but you would rather have Jackson Dart sit for a year behind a guy like Russell Wilson as opposed to signing Justin Fields to a 3-4 year deal and then drafting a quarterback. Because again, I think one of the biggest frustrations for Fields this year, again, we've talked about Arthur Smith, was he got the starting job due to Russell Wilson getting injured. He was playing better and they still benched him. There was an entire podcast where you and I basically were just yelling into the ether out going, how dumb is Mike Tomlin?
I know. Yeah, and the only way I see Pittsburgh using that first round pick on Jackson Dart is if they completely miss the ball in free agency and they get no quarterback.
Which is a possibility.
Very possible, 100% it is. I think if that ends up happening, then we do see them probably make a trade for Poopy Pants at that point. If everything else misses, they will likely make a trade for Poopy Pants and then draft a quarterback.
Yeah, even then, signing Russell Wilson to like a 2-year, $20 million per year type deal, and then drafting Jackson Dart, that gives you flexibility. Again, we all know my thoughts on Arthur Smith calling plays, and that's not something I look at and go, that is a smart decision to have your rookie quarterback dealing with. It's like having Matt Canada with Kenny Pickett.
Well, that whole offensive mindset right now is a problem in Pittsburgh, which we've discussed. Arthur Smith is a problem.
Yep.
And as much as we love Mike Tomlin as a head coach,
he's a problem.
That is a problem right now as well. And I've said it at length to lots of people who are all fire Mike Tomlin, fire Mike Tomlin. My response is always, for who?
Yeah.
That is the issue right now, is for who? You're not firing Mike Tomlin, a future Hall of Famer, for maybe this guy could be a good play caller. You're only firing Mike Tomlin because you're like, this guy is the next up-and-comer. He's going to be the next one who's talked about like Mike McDaniels or like Matt LaFleur. He's going to be talked about in the same breath as guys like Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. That is the only way you're going to fire Mike Tomlin to replace him with another coach. Arthur Smith's not that guy. We all know that. And so that's why we're rerunning the same set this year, because we'll see going into next year what's out there. I still think, I said this to our buddy, if the Buffalo Bills have a similar success this year, possibly even see more growth, then I think Joe Brady is the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, it's a very solid option. I've been looking at Joe Brady ever since he left LSU. Had a terrible stint in Carolina, but then again, seems like everyone who's going to Carolina is having a bad stint. Gets the Buffalo Bills job. Eventually, it gets the OC job and has been very good for Josh Allen. It was shocking that he didn't get a job this year. He could be the Ben Johnson of next season.
Yeah.
Which could be very useful for the Steelers. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to watch for that entire next season of how that goes. But yeah, we're basically getting to about 2 hours here, buddy. So this was a lot of news that we've ultimately had to talk about here today. Thank you all very much for joining us here. We didn't get to the Xavier Worthy news, but it's just another young receiver doing stupid shit. And so yeah, that's all that's really needing to be said about that. And Next week is going to be another very eventful week because we're going to have so much to talk about in terms of who actually signed. I know for Monday and Tuesday, I will probably be doing live streams about actual signings. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, for Sterling, I'm Brendan saying thanks for watching. Peace.